Wilson, Director of Development for StandUp for Kids Orange County, and I'm the host of ListenUp, the StandUp for Kids podcast. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with Natalie, who's a 22-year-old college student attending Cal State Fullerton and is in the StandUp for Kids program. Welcome, Natalie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Happy to be here.
All right. On today's show, we're going to talk with Natalie about the subject of mental health and the pursuit of happiness. So Natalie, first question for you. When did the concept of mental health become a conscious thing for you?
So I always kind of knew that like therapy was a thing, and I knew that was because when I was little, my parents went to therapy and I also went to therapy for like a brief time, but I knew it was like for your like brain health, but I didn't understand kind of the connection between like, oh, brain health means like, emotional well-being as well. And I think it was when I was in high school that I started to have more like anxious experiences, but I was finally able to be like, oh yes, this is anxiety that I'm feeling. This is panic. I'm having a panic attack. I'm having an anxiety attack. It once I was able to give it a name, I felt like it made more sense. And I think that's kind of when I was just becoming more aware of mental health, and I was more conscious that that was something we all, it's just as important as physical health or anything else. And I don't know exactly when that switched, but I think it was just I learned in high school at some point more about anxiety and about how it physically shows up in the body. And learning more about that definitely made me become more conscious about mental health and just more conscious about my own feelings and how I felt mentally healthy and all that jazz.
Yeah, and you prior to the time where mental health was a conscious thing that you kind of uh, I don't know, maybe had a little more control over, you had some mental health issues, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it was kind of relieving to learn that it was anxiety, that like what I was having, because for so many years I had felt anxiety, but I was never able, like, I felt like I was going crazy because I didn't know the name for it. I didn't know it was like a commonly experienced thing that people deal with all the time. And so it just made like all the struggles I had in like growing up in like elementary school with like bullies, or even in middle school with bullies, and same with like just difficult moments with my parents, knowing that, oh, like this is my body's physical response to being afraid of something, like it goes into like a panic mode. Knowing that that was why that was happening really like changed things for me, because before I was just experiencing it and not knowing what was happening or what to do really to get out of those intense feelings.
Is mental health a thing that's a nature or a nurture in your mind?
I gotta say both. I think it's a mixture of both, because it's definitely I've noticed in my own experience that I am more prone to getting anxious about certain things because of like how my parents, they get anxious about certain things, and I watched that growing up, so then I'm gonna feel like, oh, I need to respond this way to a certain situation. But I also feel like it's very much like the way that you kind of just go about repeating that process for yourself. So like, oh, if I see someone react in a certain way, I think that's how I'm supposed to react. And then if I continue to react to that in like such an anxious way over time, it's just going to make it easier for me to result to, becoming anxious whenever there's like a difficult situation or something like that arises. So I think it's definitely how your environment plays into a factor of like what's around you and who's influencing you, but it's also you continuing to kind of go into those patterns and just continue to choose the anxiety reaction.
And do you have you been diagnosed with a mental health condition?
Um, so I it's a little tricky. So I think
Okay.
I don't know because I was definitely feeling like I was really like messed up. And my parents are both bipolar. So for a long time, I just kind of believed that I was also bipolar. Um, and then, but when I was hospitalized last year for mental health, they didn't give me a full diagnosis other than just like, oh, like you have anxiety and depression. But then as I've been going to therapy consistently since then, I've sort of come to the conclusion with my therapist that I don't think I'm bipolar. I think I've just developed a lot of anxiety and depression tendencies like from growing up with two very bipolar parents and living in the stressful environment that I have been living in for the last several years. And so that was really kind of shocking to me because for so long I believed that I was also bipolar, but then looking more at like the exact, symptoms that they say and like I've never really experienced like mania in the way that like I've seen like my parents have like a manic episode. And so it just I don't know, it just kind of it made me realize like yes, I can get extremely anxious and depressed sometimes, but I those are caused by other things is not something that just happens naturally for me. It's something that has it's a cause, it's an effect from a cause.
From an environmental factor that
Yeah.
trigger. I don't know if that's the
Hmm.
right word, but
It is
um,
no, that is the right word.
okay. What is it like to have two bipolar parents? How does that, you know, as far as I know, I don't know for sure, but my parents do not have any diagnosed mental health issues. So I have my perception of like mental health, but I'm curious as to like in your case with bipolar parents, what, and I'm saying that in like a static way. I don't know if that's a static way or if that has, I'm sure it has ebbs and flows to it as well. But can you kind of describe a little bit of like growing up in that environment?
Yeah, so I feel like I didn't really even I wasn't that aware of it for most of my childhood. I guess because also when you're a kid, just growing up, you just kind of think that's how things are. Um, and I feel like it most affected me in just like my parents' relationship with each other because they definitely would be very intense about their own feelings about things, and then when they would get into arguments, it would just be very like passionate because they're both very sensitive, like highly sensitive feeling people. And so when one of them is upset or something's wrong, they both care a lot about, the situation. So they're gonna put a lot into, working that out in whatever way. And so I think it just as a child growing up, it was just kind of like hard to watch my parents get into such like especially like I felt like my mom would just get very emotionally like upset by things like my dad did growing up, and she would just get very angry really quickly or really sad really quickly, and her kind of like mood swinginess was just like I didn't as a kid I didn't really I just kind of thought like, oh, that's just how it is with these sort of situations. But so it just kind of made me more like hesitant. I felt kind of like I had to go on tiptoes sometimes around them because I just didn't want to like throw off the balance or make anyone, upset. But then I really started to like grasp the concept of like, oh, this is like a thing, like bipolar disorder, when I watched like my dad go through some manic episodes when I was a little bit older, and watching kind of like somebody you love and care about so much go through something like as intense as like having a manic episode and then like a depressive episode. It's just it really shows you like how powerful our minds can be and like how expression is so important, and like letting out your feelings about things in a healthy way is necessary. Because I remember like whenever my dad was kind of going through like one of those things, it was always like he was bringing up stuff from like his childhood that, you know, he hadn't necessarily like talked about in a while. And he would share stuff with me that I like, kind of like deep stuff that he just had gone through in his life, and hard times he'd faced before that I'd never like heard him talk about out loud before. And so it was like hard to see him in a more like emotionally like vulnerable state, but at the same time it was like we should be allowed to see our parents, you know, be more open and vulnerable about their intense feelings in a way that's healthy, because everybody needs to let it out at some point. And everybody, you know, if you're not letting it out, it's just going to build up until you break down and you kind of just let it all spew out. So I feel like I definitely watched growing up through my whole childhood and living with my parents, I watched them spew out a lot of their like held back emotions. And so that was just like, you know, it's a lot when somebody kind of explodes with all these feelings that they've been holding back for a long time. And it can be scary, but I didn't really ever realize like my experience growing up was very different from other people's until I got older and was just becoming more aware of everything.
Yeah. What do you said that your experience is different than a lot of other people's. Do you know that for sure? Or what makes you say that?
I guess I don't know that for sure. Um, I just guess that when you're growing up, I think this is everyone can kind of relate to this in a sense. Like when you're growing up, you're in this like bubble of your family, and you kind of just think like, oh, that's, you know, this is how life is. Like this is you think your parents, like you kind of want to strive to just be like them because, you know, they're like superheroes in your mind and stuff. And so I felt like I kind of grew up in this bubble of like what I thought I knew, and like beliefs I thought I had about myself and about people in the world. And then the older I get it, as I'm getting older still, like I'll find myself being like, oh no, that's not necessarily true. Like why do I believe that? You know? And so I think that's just kind of what I meant. Like my experience was maybe different from other people, because maybe some things that I'm just learning now, other people have already learned, you know, in their childhood or experienced. And so I just feel like it's definitely like I've gotten out of that bubble, or I'm still breaking out, and I'm learning that there's a lot of things that I kind of just experienced that I took for granted, or maybe just didn't account a lot of myself now based on that. But it all goes back to childhood. You know, at the end of the day, I feel like there's a lot to it.
I agree. I know last year was a tough, or sorry, last year,
Both.
maybe the last couple of years have been difficult for you, but with mental health, and a lot of things. Um, do you think that what you've been through, do you think it was a natural reaction to the actual events that occurred? Or do you think that mental health or poor mental health or lack of um, mental health training kind of exacerbated things that you've been through?
Definitely, I would say, yeah, like a lack of mental health training has exacerbated things I went through. But I think it's also one thing I've been working on now in like my mental health journey is kind of accepting that the way I reacted to things in the past that maybe made things a little bit harder for me, I have to accept that that was me trying the best that I could at the moment, wherever I was at, in whatever circumstances I was at, with whatever limited knowledge or understanding I had about it. And because, yeah, I was going to therapy back then and I was learning tools, but the stresses that I had around me, the own negative beliefs I had about myself and just my life, I felt like were the biggest obstacles in my way. And so, yeah, I had some tools at my disposal, but I wasn't in the mental frame of mind to be able to like connect the two and help myself out more. So I that's where I feel like I struggled a lot.
And let's share with folks kind of what your journey's been like. Where you grew up, you're at Cal State Fullerton now. So let's go a little bit, just kind of your life trajectory to this point.
Okay, so I was born in Pasadena, California, and then I moved to San Gabriel with my family shortly after my younger sister was born in 2002. Yeah, I know when she was born. So um, I grew up in San Gabriel for pretty much all of my childhood. I went to like elementary school, middle school, high school, all in that little sleepy town. And I definitely was a very social person, like very socially influenced person. Like I am a big people person, so I care a lot about other people, and I'm very extroverted by nature. And I think um, my parents are both sort of like that too, and they always kind of instilled just like a being, kind of out loudly, themselves. And so I think in elementary school, I kind of did some of that, but it sometimes had some backlash because I was very sensitive. I'm still very sensitive. I'm a very emotional person, but I think as a kid, when other kids can be kind of mean, and I would just take that really personally and get really affected by, things that kids would say and or things my friends would do that hurt my feelings. And so that was just kind of something over time I like feel like my skin is getting thicker too, is just like not caring as much about what other people think. But I kind of that's just something all growing up through school I dealt with. And then my parents, they had a lot of like just issues of their own that they needed to work through. And like money was always something that was very complicated and like caused a lot of frustration for my parents. And they definitely struggled to, because I knew they wanted to give us the best that they could. And they did a great job, by providing, a home and like food and like, clothes and all the kind of basic needs. But it definitely was like, oh, money is a stressful subject, and we're always kind of trying to make ends meet. And so I kind of developed over time. I was less likely to like lean or depend on my parents for things like emotional support and even like more and more financial support. I've kind of like stopped leaning on them for those things just because it became very apparent to me growing up that I couldn't depend on my parents for those things in the way that I wanted them to be there for me. I couldn't always get that from them just because they couldn't even, take care of themselves sometimes in those aspects. So that was definitely another part of my like growing up, and I learning that. And so I definitely became more dependent on like my friends and the people like my chosen family basically for that emotional support. And that really became apparent how much I was choosing my or making my chosen family my emotional support when I kind of got to college and I was, living away from my home for the first time. And I was living with roommates, and that's when I got really close to one of my freshman year roommate. We ended up living together for like 3 years because we became very close friends, and we kind of felt like soul sisters in a way. And we were very close friends, but my mental health was, kind of really started to really struggle in college just because of all the different pressures that I was facing at the time. I was living on my own. I had to work to support myself, to like give myself money for my basic needs. I was going to school full time, and that takes a lot of energy out of me, like mentally and physically, because I'm there for a lot of time and I have to, spend time outside of school working on school stuff. So it was just very draining. And I definitely became, a lot more unhinged in the sense that I was getting anxious a lot more easily. Like I remember I would wake up with anxiety a lot, like almost every morning at some points, just because I would instantly think about all the things I had to do that day. And I just felt like so small, and like I had this huge valley and mountains and like this whole world of things I still needed to accomplish. And I just felt like a very small person, and I didn't believe that I could do all of it to my best abilities. And so I definitely became more anxious and stressed out, and kind of just like my emotions were very like kind of up and down about things. The further along in college I got.
And so just as far as timing goes, so what year in school are you now, and when did you go to college?
Oh yeah. So I graduated 2016 from high school,
Okay.
and I started at Cal State Fullerton that fall, and I'm still there. I haven't graduated yet. I'm a fifth year now. And I study theater and American studies. And I think that's partially why it's going to take me a little bit to graduate, is because I'm a double major, which not a lot of people do. And they also tell you shouldn't double major if you're a theater major, because it's a lot already. But I was like, screw it, I'll do it. Because I do like learning. But yeah, I'm a fifth year. I don't have a projected graduation date yet, because I actually have like several more classes I need to take, but I'm only going part-time now just so I can work. So I really don't know when I'm going to graduate, but it's okay. We're getting there.
Yeah, and so and we talked about the last couple of years being difficult, and so the first couple of years of college were okay, going and separating from your parents, and where do you live now?
Oh, I live in Fullerton.
Okay.
Ever since my freshman year, I've lived in apartments in Fullerton. This is the third apartment that I'm at in Fullerton.
Okay.
But my freshman year, I lived in one. I've always lived off campus, because it's cheaper than on campus housing. And my first year, I feel like progressively as I've gone through college, my mental health has gotten worse, but now it's kind of leveling out and getting better. But
So what is the cause of that? Why did it get worse over college?
I think because college gets harder and harder. It starts out, you start out with like 100 level classes, and you just keep advancing. And the closer you get to the finish, I feel like the more of like a pressure it is. It's like, oh, when are you going to graduate? When it's, what are you going to do after you graduate? There's like all these things I feel like that the further along you get in college, you have to start thinking about more of. And just the coursework in general gets more difficult too. Um, and I think that's why for me in my experience, I noticed it got more difficult for me as I went on, just because I think the levels of stuff and pressure I had on me was kept increasing. Because like my freshman year, I didn't have to work. I wasn't working. I was just going to school, so I could just focus on my classes more. But then sophomore year is when I was taking like 21 units at one time and working 3 part-time jobs at like the same time. I have no idea how I did that. Now I'm like, how did I do that? But it just like I felt like each year just kept kind of, I was taking on more and more, and I wasn't giving to myself anymore. I was just putting more on my shoulders and then just hoping I could still keep going, even though I wasn't building myself up any more than I needed to.
And you also had some external things happen as well that impacted
Oh
your
yeah.
situation too. Can you talk about that?
So I knew kind of by the time of my like, I think end of sophomore year, beginning of my junior year of college, I knew that I was getting so stressed out to a point that I needed to ask for help. I needed to reach out to a counselor because I had definitely felt anxiety and gotten panic attacks from school or related to like friends and outside of school things, and it just would cause a problem with my schoolwork. And I knew, I was like, okay, this is kind of becoming too big for me to handle on my own. And I knew that it was like increasing in severity because, for example, like my freshman year of college, I can remember like one really distinct, you know, anxiety episode I had that caused me to not go to one of my classes. And that was like a big thing for me that happened my freshman year. I remember like feeling bad because I was so anxious I couldn't even bring myself to go to class. But then sophomore year and junior year, it was like that was happening weekly almost, you know. It was so just like the frequency of those kind of events kind of made me realize, okay, I need to get some help for this because I can't just keep doing the same thing thinking it's going to get better. And so I started seeing a counselor at my school because they have counseling there. And that was a big help because I kind of finally started to just take the time, you know, out of my schedule to just like, okay, this hour is for me to just talk about all this stuff that's been weighing on me and get some help for some and some validation, because that was the biggest thing that I started to get was just about like a therapist, or they can validate your feelings and tell you you're not crazy and, you know, help you deal with it better. And so I started going to therapy consistently the fall of my or fall or spring of my junior year of college. And it wasn't until really though I felt like my mental health was really dwindling was 2019. So last year, um, I I was just, I don't even know what it was, but I think I was just very dependent on other people in my life to bring me peace and happiness, that I kind of stopped doing that for myself, and that made it harder for me to mentally get healthier. For example, like at the beginning of 2019, I started dating this guy and he was my first boyfriend, and I'd never been in like a serious, you know, long-term relationship like that before. And I had very much didn't never think I was going to be that sucked into relationships, but I got so sucked in. I was like deeply invested in this person, and I got, you know, I he from the get-go was always telling me how much he like loved and cared about me, which made, you know, makes you feel good. Anyone would feel good to hear that. But after a while I just became very dependent on that, and I didn't even realize it was happening. And so when I was away from him for like a while, or I felt like there was, you know, a disconnection, that would really affect me very personally. And I felt sort of unstable just on my own. Like I felt like I always needed like somebody to kind of validate my existence, or just, you know, that I'm love, like I'm worthy of love and care. And it became very apparent when over the summer of last year, um, I went on a vacation with my mom and my sister to like a cousin's wedding on the East Coast. And I had like a really good time the first part of the trip, but then because we were there for like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And towards the end of the trip, I just found myself getting so like depressed and anxious for like no reason. I don't even know why I was starting to feel that way, but I think it was just like spending time with my mom and my sister, who I haven't like spent that much intimate time with in a while, like kind of brought up things, you know, that I had never really said out loud that were like hurting me, or I was, you know, just like secrets or resentments I had towards like my family that I had never expressed just started to come up more. And I just felt very frustrated with myself for feeling these like complicated, intense feelings. And then I didn't have, you know, my boyfriend who I kind of designated as like my savior, my rock. He wasn't physically there for me, and that made me feel so alone, and kind of like I had developed so much like self-hatred for myself just because like of things that happened with other people. Like my mom and I got into like some intense fights before, and so I just like felt like I deserved to feel like hated and stuff. And then um there was the big thing that happened was when I was very starting to get kind of unhinged on this trip last summer with my mom. I was feeling super depressed and anxious, and she didn't know what to do about it. Like she didn't know what I needed to help me out. And she was trying her best to be present for me and to help me out, but it wasn't what I needed. And sometimes like things she did made it worse in different ways. And I just felt so trapped and like so alone. And so that was like one of the lowest points of my life I can honestly look back on, because the ways that I remember sitting like on this grass outside for like 2 hours waiting for my mom and like my grandma and my aunt to like finish eating, because I was just so upset I like couldn't even be eating with them in this like restaurant. I was just so distraught. And I just remember sitting on the grass like outside for like 2 hours, just like literally wanting to die and like not wanting to be here, and then calling the suicide hotline and having them put me on hold for like 45 minutes, and then having them hang up on me after the 45 minutes, and just feeling like, wow, if these people, like the ones you're supposed to call when you really are at the edge, don't even help you, like what's the point? Like I just felt so low and like nothing was worth it. And then it's so symbolic because as soon as I got back from that vacation, like I made it through, like I got to the end of it and we came back home. Like as soon as we got back, I went straight to Fullerton, like ran away to go be with my boyfriend at the time, because I just like I felt so disconnected, and like my family did not understand me at all, or like they couldn't know what I was going through. So I just was like, oh well, this person who says he loves me, like that's all I need, then I'm just gonna run to him and everything will be okay. And that's like where all my warped thinking, I think, is like I just put so much power, my own, the power to make me happy, make me feel good, into other people, into like my mom, into my dad, into my boyfriend at the time, into like my friends. Like they were the ones who determined how I felt about myself, not me.
So can you help a person who hasn't been there kind of understand?
Yeah. So it's definitely rooted in childhood stuff, and something like that I learned with my latest therapist that I have is like the attachment theory. And basically, it's the idea that based on how your parents, like how you were raised as a child, you develop an attachment style. So for me, my parents weren't always the most stable to go to when I was a child. So I never had like a secure attach. I never felt securely, safely attached to my family, and where I felt like unconditional love from them. It
Okay,
always felt kind of conditional.
that's interesting because
Yeah.
that, like, I would say that my parents give me unconditional love. Like I feel that. So you do not feel that necessarily.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's pretty big, right?
Yeah.
It's a big concept. If you don't feel that, then what is that? What is the offspring of that? It makes you feel like you have to
Try
do
hard.
things,
Yeah.
to get your parents' love.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. And then so that causes like, because you feel like you are not enough just on your own to be deserving of that love and care. So you just kind of develop this inherent belief that you aren't enough, or you are too much for people, and like you're not this perfect person that you think you need to be, and you feel like you can't ever be that person. And so it just is like a constant feeling of like you're not going to be enough, and you're not satisfied, and you can't satisfy other people.
I mean, I know the feeling of not ever being satisfied. I have that. No matter what I do or what I achieve or where I go, like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So I definitely have that going on with me. But um, so then when you don't feel like you're enough, then that manifests itself into negative self-talk, probably lots of things that are not good for you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because you, I don't know, for me, I just felt like it. The more I didn't feel like unconditionally loved or accepted, I just felt like there was such a internal battle because it's like I want to be, I know in theory that I deserve love and care, but these these factors and I feel like are preventing me from getting that, but it's also who I am, and so I can't, it's like I was fighting myself all the time and then fighting myself for having these negative feelings like wanting to die. I was like, I hate that you want to die right now, but then that just makes it worse, you know? So it was
Yeah.
a very, like a big snowball of negativity.
You mentioned calling the suicide hotline. Was that the is that the only time that you've gotten to that point?
No, I think that was like the first time I had really ever like tried to call the number, and it sucked so bad. Like my experience with it sucked so bad. I just like I have gotten to that point before, but I don't think I've reached out to that same number because I was just so disappointed with the experience that I've done. Like I've gone to other places or methods.
Yeah, but so you've actually felt like wanting to kill yourself?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I shouldn't, it's like I'm laughing about it, but no, it's yes. I think I'm laughing because it's very intense to think about, but yeah, I definitely have felt like very like I wanted to die. I never have had like a, oh, this is how I'm going to kill myself. Like I know these, because that's something they always ask you, um, in like for mental health people, they always ask you like, oh, do you have a plan or anything? I never really had a plan. It was sort of just I was overwhelmed with the feeling that I did not want to be alive and experiencing all this pain anymore. It was like I just want it to be done with, and had this very I was very convinced that I was just a burden on other people, and so I was like, if I'm gone, if I'm dead, I'm no longer that burden. Like especially with my family, I kind of felt like I was just a financial burden on them, like, oh, they have to pay for me to go to school, they have to pay for my apartment, and I'm just sucking money from them, and that's all I am. And
Uh,
so yeah.
question on that. Do you feel that, how to say this? Do you feel that that was a manifestation of an unhealthy mind? Or do you think, or like literally, do your parents actually feel like you're a big burden on them?
No, it's totally a manifestation of an unhealthy mind. Like, I mean, my parents, I know that they love me and that I'm not just a burden on them. I just I've felt that way before. And it's not their fault necessarily. I mean, maybe things they said may have triggered me into thinking some things like that, but it's all my own mind and how I perceive everything and how I respond to it.
And most of so that, and it's kind of, I don't know, I have a it feels like there was kind of a trajectory of um a slow build of mental health, how do you say it, issues or things kind of ramped up over time, and they kind of came to an apex in the last 18 months, something like that.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
that is totally fair. Yeah.
Okay, so what does the apex look like? Or and it's actually the bottom. What does the bottom look like?
What
First,
do you mean the bottom?
Like what is really, really bad mental health, and like how does that manifest itself? I mean, suicide, thinking about wanting to kill yourself. um,
Self-harm was like a big thing that I never like. It's funny because growing up, I remember my mom was always like, oh, like self-harm, like basically it's like that's so stupid, like don't hurt yourself, like that's dumb. Kind of that was like my mom's attitude about that. And I think it's ironic because as my mental health has like was decreasing, I did a lot more self-harm than I like ever could imagine myself being capable of doing.
what is
And
that? What is self-harm? What does that mean? What does that mean physically? Or
I think it's both a physical, well, for me, it was both a physical thing and an emotional thing because I have very self destructive tendencies. And so I would definitely be like self harming myself in the way that I would like, cause problems with friends or loved ones just because I felt like that's what I deserved was like to not have these people to care about me. So I would kind of like cause problems in my friendships and make drama out of nothing just to like hurt me in a sense. And then the physical self-harm was like I felt like I a big thing that I don't know how it started really, but I would just like want to like scratch at myself and like break my skin. This is not to get a little dark, but just like break like or just scratch or just like cause like a because it's like when the emotional pain is so great and it feels like so overwhelming, it's almost like a physical pain is like nothing compared to like the emotional pain of it all. So I remember like this is crazy to think about too because it I never thought I was that unhealthy in high school, but the first time I ever like really self-harm was I think my senior or junior year of high school when I was going through some stuff that definitely made me feel like I was kind of like a terrible person, just with like friends and other stuff like drama that was going on. I just felt like an awful person. And I remember like hiding underneath like the counter in like the dressing room of my theater and like finding like a bit of like broken plastic and just like scratching my arm with it. And it just felt like it was so weird the feeling that because I was very upset, but like having a physical representation of like that emotional turmoil, like I think it's self-harm is very symbolic in the sense that it's like you're literally it's like a cry for help if you think about it because you can't see people's mental or emotional scars when you look at somebody, but you can see physical scars of trauma on their body. And so I feel like if you are such in a mental and emotional state where you are that hurting that much that you feel like you need to resort to physically hurting yourself, that just I feel like that just shows like how much you want other people to know you're in pain, but like you yourself are maybe afraid to even like share that with people. Because I know back then I was kind of afraid to admit to everybody how much I was struggling with certain things. So then like scratching myself, with that broken plastic or whatever made me feel like, oh, maybe somebody will notice me doing this and maybe they'll help me. But that was just kind of a very, poor coping mechanism in the sense that there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's no need to be ashamed for asking for help, but you shouldn't have to like resort to those poor, harmful things in order to get that sort of help. Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
you also mentioned in a prior conversation that there was a police incident, or there was a thing. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah, so my the fall of my senior year, or so my fourth year of college, just a year like last fall, so fall of 2019. Um so kind of like going off of like that really dark trip that I went on with my mom, ever since like then I had kind of just become a lot more dependent on my boyfriend and like my roommate who was my best friend. Um for like that was kind of my chosen family, and that was like my support system, and I just become very dependent on them. And school was getting, you know, kind of overwhelming, and I was just feeling like I was doing stuff, like a lot of stuff, and I didn't feel that good about myself doing it. Like I remember I was taking a geography class at the time, and it was my first science class that I'd taken in college, and I just felt like every time I went to class, I just felt like, oh, I'm like the stupidest one here, like nobody wants to talk to me. I just had such like negative self-talk going on the daily basically during that time. And um I just really wanted to be like this perfect person or this perfect version of myself, and I just couldn't be it. And I I the instance with the police happened was I was planning to go to a concert with my friend to see this artist we both really liked, and I was so looking forward to it. I was really excited. And I was getting ready to go, and I just started thinking about all these like what ifs. And I was like, how are we gonna get there? What, like, whose car are we gonna go in? And I was already feeling kind of drained that day for whatever reason. I can't remember why, but I was already feeling like anxious and drained, and I didn't feel like I wanted to drive all the way to LA for this thing. And so, but then I was afraid to like ask my friend to drive us because I didn't want to burden her by, because I originally said I was going to drive, so I didn't want her to feel bad for drive. Like I built up so much in my head about this situation that I didn't even need to. I was just, and it was crazy to me to think about like how it all started, because I don't even know why I got so anxious in that moment, like as I did. But I just felt like I'm not going to be like this perfect friend to my friend, and we're not going to have a good night because I am not, you know, feeling my best. And, you know, I feel like that's going to cause her problems. So I was just imagining all these worst case scenarios just when it really wasn't that complicated at all. And for some reason, I got so worked up at my apartment just thinking about how I was going to go to this concert in like a few hours. And I got so anxious. Like I was having a panic attack, and I was crying and freaking out. And I used to do this thing where I was telling you I was very self-destructive. I would like want to throw things and just like break things, and I was like throwing pillows on the floor and like screaming, and like it was crazy how worked up I had gotten from all this. And I remember one of the because my therapist that I was going to at the time, we had been talking about like, you know, how to avoid basically self-harm. And one of the techniques that she had like learned in some of her studying and she suggested with me is that whenever I had like a desire to hurt myself was just to like scratch myself, because like you can like scratch yourself and not hurt yourself really, like you're just scratching, but you also are able to get like some of that adrenaline or whatever out. And so I like tried to do that and like do some other things. And then after what, it was just like my roommate at the time was there too, but I think she was kind of afraid to like, she didn't know what to do either. But then she'd come out and we were talking and I had calmed down. I was just like crying a bit. And then we heard like a knock at the door, and we went up to the door, and like we had like, you know, the little peephole, and it was three tall, very large, like police officer men with like the full gear just like outside the door. And they were like, Natalie, like they knew my name too, which was crazy. They were like, Natalie, like you need to let us in and stuff. And I did not feel comfortable letting in three police officers to my apartment. And so I told them like, oh, like you guys can't come in. And they're like, oh, well, you need to come outside and talk to us then. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I made like a mistake of opening the door slightly. And as soon as I opened the door slightly, they like stuck their foot in the door, so I couldn't close it again. And so I just felt so trapped by them. Like they were like, you need to come outside and talk to us. Like we don't have to come in, but you have to come outside to talk to us. So I went out in the hallway to talk to them, and I was still very like upset, and also being confronted by like 3 police officers just very like intimidated me. And they basically were trying to understand like the situation I was going through. And so I was talking to them on the hallway, but I was just very distraught, and it's like very intimidating. And then they we went down like the staircase that was right by my apartment, and I was like basically being cornered in the staircase by like 1 or 2 police officers. And then I was just like, I'm really anxious right now. Can I just go back inside? Like I remember I kept repeating, like, I'm really anxious right now. I just want to go back inside. I just want to go back inside. Like, I don't want to be crying out here, being questioned by the police in front of like everybody at my apartment. And the officer kept saying, like, oh, well, I've just never felt like anxious or depressed before. Can you just explain to me, like, what you're feeling? And he just kept asking me to like explain to him. And it was just so like, it's one thing to be right here and like talking about it, but when you're in the moment of feeling that, how the heck are you going to explain why you've come to like the conclusions you have, or why your body's reacting in the way you are? And it was just kind of like a back and forth of that. And they saw like the scratches on my arm, and they were like concerned that I was gonna like harm myself. And so they were basically saying like, oh, we're gonna take you to the hospital, or somebody from the hospital has to come here to talk. And I was just like, I just want to go back inside. And they just like finally just like had enough of me. And so they basically just like turned me around and forced me into handcuffs, like right there on the staircase, and were like, yeah, you have to go to the hospital. And they just like decided in that moment for me, you know, to take me there. And I had no idea what was happening. I was terrified to just even be like handled like that by like, because I've never had any interaction like that with the police. And so to be like forced into handcuffs, and literally like like they hold you so tight like you can't move, and it was just terrifying. And my roommate was there at the time, and I was like, can you, because they wouldn't even let me go back into my apartment to get like my ID or to get like anything I needed. And so I asked her to like get that stuff for me. And then they like put me in the back of their police car, and they also like checked my body. They're like, there's no drugs or weapons back here, so like there better not be any like when we take you out of the car, like treating me like I was a criminal. And the whole time I kept asking, I was like, am I under arrest? Like, am I under arrest? And they're like, no, you're being detained, and we're going to take you to the hospital. And I was like, this feels exactly like being arrested, because I'm in the back of a cop car in handcuffs, and you're treating me like a criminal. And it was just like so like crazy to think that I was just in the back of a police car, like on my way somewhere. And then when I got to the hospital, they like took me through like this back entrance, and I had like this awful thought of like, what if these police officers like rape me in the back of this car? Like I had so many like dark, just like fearful thoughts. And then everything was like we just went to the emergency room though, and I was handcuffed to a chair for like 5 hours because they didn't have a room available for me, and they wouldn't leave. The police officers wouldn't leave until I got a room. So I was literally just handcuffed to a chair with these police officers there for like 5 hours in the emergency room. They wouldn't let me see my friends or my family. At the time, it was like late at night, and I wasn't talking to my mom at the time, so I asked to call my dad, but then he didn't answer his phone, so I just like left a message for my dad. And then they also, another thing that was crazy about that whole experience is I didn't know, so I was basically taken in on a 5150 hold, which is a 72-hour watch at a hospital. And when I heard, like, the nurse was the one who told me that when I came in, like the police didn't say anything. Like, so I thought, oh, maybe I'll just go to the hospital and get to go right home. No, like when they bring you in for that, you are legally supposed to be in the hospital for like 72 hours to be monitored. And that's 3 days. And this happened on a Sunday night, and I had work and school the next 3 days. So I had to text my boss at work and tell him, you know, my boss who does not know, I never talk about mental health with my boss. I had to just be like, sorry, I'm having a personal emergency. I can't be at work the next 3 days. I had a test scheduled for one of my classes that I just had to miss because And so it was just like a lot just got forced me kind of out of everything that I was doing in a very traumatic way. And it was honestly like probably one of the darkest, most traumatic things I've ever experienced. But it kind of definitely made me realize like, okay, like your mental health is something that you need to be like actively working on, because I knew that I never wanted this kind of experience to happen to me again.
And sorry, and a 5150, is that suicide?
I
What is that?
Yeah, I think it's because they said they were, because of the scratches on my arm, they were worried I was gonna hurt myself, even though they kept asking me like if I had any plans to kill myself or hurt myself, and I kept saying no. They were just like, because of my emotional state, they didn't trust just leaving me, which I can understand. But the whole time I was at the hospital in like the mental health ward, I was like sad to be there, yeah, but I wasn't suicidal like at all. Like I was very, I just was like, I want to get out of here, so I'm just gonna like be chill. So it was definitely, I think it's because of like a suicide hold, but they could tell like the people in the hospital that I was fine, because I ended up getting released early, a little bit early. I didn't have to stay the full 72 hours, which I was very happy about. But
Was
yeah,
that,
it was probably the darkest thing.
yeah, was that did things turn around, or I don't know if turn around is the right term, but I know you're in a better place now than you were whenever
Yeah,
earlier this
last
year.
October.
Yeah. So what, I guess that brings us into kind of our last portion here of like so you've been at the lowest, the very low points.
That's funny, because it didn't turn around after then. Like
Okay.
it made me realize that I needed to work more on my mental health, but it didn't turn anything around really for me.
Hmm.
Um, which I think is interesting. I feel like the turning around part for me was really this year, not not even 6 months ago was, I feel like, the biggest turning point for me.
Okay, so it was October last year, and
Mhm.
then it was May-ish, May,
May
June-ish.
and June of this year were the big major life changing things, I would
Okay.
say.
So how'd you get through October to May? You're just, you're a little wobbly, but
Oh,
you
super
managed.
long.
Okay.
I had PTSD with the police after I got out of the hospital. I literally, last Halloween, I was convinced that the police were going to take me from my apartment again. And so I couldn't be at my own apartment. Like, I just didn't know where to go. I felt so unsafe and unstable everywhere. And so it was very wobbly. I wasn't okay afterwards, but I was trying to be okay. And I think that's kind of, that incident made me a lot more dependent on my boyfriend at the time, because I definitely became a lot like, I needed somebody there for me all the time, basically, after that, because I didn't feel safe on my own. And so I definitely got a lot more attached to spending time with my boyfriend. And so I felt like after that period, it kind of like, he unfairly became my like support system and my caregiver, because I couldn't do that for myself. And so as I was trying to like get on my feet and just make it through the semester, go on to the next semester's school, like there was still so many challenges and I was terrified, but I was just like, oh, well, I have this person who really loves and cares about me, so I'll be okay. And that only lasts for so long, because everybody has their own, like, one thing I've realized, or I've learned in therapy, which I really like, is everybody, like, I feel like we need to start looking at mental health like a spectrum. It's like, yes, some people can have like more severe, but everybody has some kind of anxiety. Everybody has some kind of depression, whether it's like slight or extreme. Everybody's got something going on. nobody's a perfect peach in their mind. And so my boyfriend obviously had stuff going on too, but I was so consumed with my own needs and needing help that I just very much put all of that on him, and was just kind of like, and then my roommate left. She moved out of our apartment. She basically ghosted me kind of as a friend. Like, she stopped talking to me. And then I had to find out through her brother talking to my dad that she didn't want to live together anymore. And that, and her reasoning behind that, this was in January of this year, was that she also was mentally struggling too. But I guess my mental health was just making her feel unsafe at our own apartment. And so that was a really hard thing to go through too, because somebody who I thought was like my best friend, who my soul sister, like literally like a chosen family member, had basically cut herself out of my life completely. Like, I never saw her really again after that. And we had lived together and we'd been so close. And her reasoning was because of my mental health. So the shame and guilt and like that I felt for myself and hatred for my own mental health struggles kind of just increased after that point, because she had seen me, she had been there with me through, that traumatic incident with the police. And yet, even though I was trying to recover from that, trying to get better, it still wasn't enough. And it was getting to the point where it was making her feel unsafe and not like she could be my friend anymore. And that really freaking sucked and broke me down and caused me to just get even closer to my boyfriend at the time, because she left and she was like one of the two people I was closest to. So then obviously I'm just going to get more sucked into that other person. And the real low point and changing point was in May of this year, when me and my mom have had like iffy relationships, but basically there was an incident where I had gotten really anxious at home, and I had like my mom, I heard her talking to my sister about me in like the next room, and that got me really upset, because I feel like very judged. Like my whole struggle with my mental health, I feel like it's been I've perceived that it's like other people in my family, especially like my mom, really judge it and don't, they're not able to give me the support that I need. And so it just like really bothers me. And hearing her like talk to my sister about like me just in the next room, like right after she came to talk to me, I just heard her going to talk to my sister, and it just caused me to feel so upset. And I ran out of my room and like ran into my sister's room and was just like, Mom, like this is the reason why I don't feel like safe with you, or like I want to do things with you, is because like of this right now. And she got very scared by that, and ended up like threatening to call the police on me if I acted like that, acted violent like that in front of her again. And that really triggered me, because I was like, wow, my own mom knows I have like trauma with the police and knows I'm struggling, and is still going to threaten the police on her own daughter for her mental health. And it just like really kind of made me feel like I don't have a family, I don't have, a home, I don't feel safe. It just like reinforced these ideas I already kind of was believing in. It just reinforced it. And so that was at the very beginning of May that happened. And so I just stayed even more in Fullerton. I was like, okay, this is just me on my own in Fullerton, just me and my boyfriend. And I think quarantine was a big part of like all of this too, because having to be forced to just stay inside more, you do reflect a lot more on like yourself. And it also feels a lot more isolating when you aren't able to see, because I've always been very social, so I've always had a lot of friends, but not being able to see them or talk to them as much like really made me feel more isolated and on my own. And then having my family not be able to be there in the ways that I needed them to be made me feel more on my own. So it was just like I felt so helpless, because I didn't know how I was going to continue to live my life in a way that made me feel good. Like I just felt like I wasn't able to do that. So I was very convinced at the beginning of May of this year that I was going to kill myself in June. I remember, like, it's crazy to think about. I remember writing a note in my phone basically being like, in June 2020, I'm going to kill myself, like, so I no longer will be a burden on my friends or my family or my boyfriend. Like, because even though I knew he loved me and like cared about me, I still felt like I was just a huge emotional, financial burden on him too. And it was so, like, I was so warped in my thinking. I remember, like, I would tell him, like, oh, well, get used to, enjoy me now because I'm not going to be around for much longer. Even though I didn't have, like, a plan of how I wanted to kill myself or anything, I was just like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. Also, because I was supposed to be moving out of my apartment at the end of June, and I had no idea where I was going to live. I had no idea how I was going to pay for where I was going to live. Because my family, like, I just knew I couldn't depend on them anymore for anything, basically. And I was just so freaked out. And it kind of was like, I kind of took the month of May to be like, oh, convince me basically that life is worth living and that I shouldn't give up yet. And there were some really dark moments in May too. And I probably did the worst physical self-harm to myself in May of this year. And that was very traumatizing for me, but also my boyfriend watched me, like, he was there at the time, and that was really hard for him to, like, experience. And it was hard because I felt like I kept getting close to feeling better, and then something would happen and all the shame and, like, the self-hatred and just, like, the guilt of everything just would pile up again and just make me feel like I was drowning. And it was it was all, like, just little things would just trigger me, like the smallest of things. Like, if I felt anxious and I needed to go do something, that was just too much for me. Like, I couldn't bring myself to do the things I wanted to do, and then that made me more mad at myself, and it was just like that negativity snowball again. And so that's just, like, May was just a very dark time for me this year. And it's crazy thing, that was May, that's the 5th month. It's December now. That was only like 7 months ago. I was really struggling.
So how did you go from there to now? What so it get so we're painting a picture of despair, and it was pretty desperate. It sounds like pretty really rough, difficult time in many, many, many ways. Um, but we are now in a different place.
Yeah, we're in a very different place now.
So what was there a moment or a couple of moments, or was there a light bulb? What how did we get on a different path?
um I think there was a bunch of little, like, light bulb moments, but then there was a big light bulb moment. But the little ones definitely led the way for the bigger one. So basically, I think the root of, like, a lot of my struggles were, I felt very isolated and like I couldn't do it on my own. And I felt very afraid of what the future would hold because there was a lot of uncertainty and I didn't think I could get through it all. And I felt like I didn't believe in myself at all. And one of the biggest starts of the shift was that I got connected to Stand Up for Kids, and I got connected to a free therapist kind of at, like, the same time that happened. And that was because I was a part of a support group this spring with my school through our counseling and psychological services. And I was in a support group, and I had reached out to the group leader on, like, our last meeting, and I was like, I'm really struggling, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And she helped me get connected with a caseworker who basically had like this list of resources for housing, for food, for health, all these things. And he really helped set it up, because I didn't even know Stand Up for Kids existed until he like told me about it. And then he also got me connected to Crescent Clinic, which does free like online therapy. And once I started to go to that therapist, that's really when I realized I didn't have to kind of just be stuck in the way that my life was, or the way that my mind was. And I started to see like the possibilities. And then when I started getting connected with Stand Up for Kids, I was like, okay, like even though my parents can't help me with this, like there are other people who can help me find a place to live and make sure that I'm not homeless, and make sure I'm on the track to success. And that was a big thing, to just kind of be told like you're not like alone, like there's other adults who even don't even know you but care about you and want to help you. And like that was just so like beautiful to hear, because I felt like the adults I had cared about most of my life weren't very helpful to me at that time. So just having other people was like, oh, thank goodness, And so those two things started to definitely make me feel better, and like there was more hope. And so by the time June rolled around, I wasn't suicidal anymore. I wasn't like wanting to die anymore. It was kind of just like, how do I get back on my feet after being that low? Because it was probably May was some of the lowest I've been to, just in terms of like the self-harm that I did to myself, and how um, just dark my own thoughts were back then. But by June, I was definitely feeling that I was getting back on my feet and trying to work things out. And I was just starting to believe in my own power to like help myself more. And then the big light bulb of June was when my boyfriend, who I had been dating now for like a year and a half, admitted to me. So this actually happened on a day that I was mentally struggling already. And he admitted to me that he had kind of been cheating on me for like the last 8 months. And it's like a complicated situation. I don't really want to get into all the details, but basically, he was the last person in my life that I was super close to that I had thought would ever hurt me or betray my trust in that way. Like, first, it was like my parents disappointing me. Then it was like my roommate, who I thought was like my best friend, leaving me and disappointing me. And then it was like my boyfriend, the person I loved more than like anybody, telling me that he had failed me in this way and wasn't the person that I thought he was. And it just finally kind of hit me, the thing that I had known all along, but I had just really like forgotten along the way, is like, you can't fully depend on anybody else. Like, you can't make somebody else make everything right for you. I had given my power away to so many people for so long, and use them as a means for happiness and peace, that I denied myself the ability to do that for me. And I had even forgotten how to take care of myself. Like, all the validation that my boyfriend gave me of like, oh, you're beautiful, like, you're awesome, you got this, all the physical comfort, all the emotional comfort, I had literally forgotten how to give that to myself. And it wasn't until we broke up at the end of June that it finally kind of clicked for me. I was like, I have to be my number one fan. I have to be my best friend. I have to be my own mother and father. I have to be my own caregiver and supporter, because I can no longer give that responsibility to anybody else who is outside of me.
Okay. So what's interesting to me, um, like that is like in I mean, of the events, of the negative things that could happen to you, having the last person on earth that you trust and love and care about betray you is bad, right? And for somebody who has got mental health issues, that could be the thing that just pushes them to really, really bad world. But for you, that was the biggest light bulb that you're finding positive, uh, whatever. A light bulb is generally a good idea, a good event. So, and that's all about mindset, right? Like when life hands you lemons, uh, so I have a tough time squaring that from like 1 month before when you wanted to kill yourself.
Yeah.
1 month later, your boyfriend breaks up with you, and it's the best thing that happened to you.
I know it sounds funny. It wasn't like in the moment it was the best thing. In the moment I was like, this is awful. This is the
Right,
worst thing ever.
right.
But I think it was because I had already started to feel better, and the seeds of like self-improvement, like the seeds of like, oh, you're gonna have these people helping you find a place to live and you're not on your own. You have this therapist who you can go to for free who can help you out now. Like having those other support systems kind of get in place, it made me realize that like, oh, I don't have to totally put all of my everything onto one person anymore. Like I have options. There's other things out there. So it definitely was a very dark time, and I did hate it, and it was very hard, and it still is hard. I'm still getting over it. But would not be where I'm at today in my mental health if I was still with him and if I was still dependent so much on
Mhm,
other people.
mhm. Uh, so one of the other conversations that we had, you mentioned having to work to be happy. Um, what does that mean to you?
um it's not easy. Like you have to put in a conscious effort to do it. It's not just gonna show up. And oh, I mean, sometimes it does show up, happiness does show up, but if you are in a very dark place like the way I was, happiness is definitely a choice, because it feels a lot easier when you're in those dark places to just kind of stay in the darkness and to not get up out of bed and just lay in bed all day and just be in your mind and think about all the things that are bringing you down and just let them keep bringing you down. Like that's an easier choice to make, I think, than to force yourself to get up, to get ready for the day, to go outside, to go on a walk, to do the things that you know are good for you, even if it's more effort. Because that was a big thing for me, was just starting to go on walks and go outside every day. Because quarantine, I mean, we're all at home, but it I started making it a point to go make sure I was getting some fresh air and sunlight like every day, because I needed that for like my soul. Also, like it's good for you too. And so that's why I feel happiness is something you have to choose and work towards, because it's not always going to come easy, but you have to find the things that make you happy, and you have to kind of keep at them and do them, and keep like making choices every day to align yourself with the kind of life and person that you want to be. um and that definitely was something that I started realizing more and more after June, because I was not with my boyfriend anymore and I had a lot more time just by myself. And I started seeing myself make the choices that were making me happier. And then I was like, oh, let me just keep doing that and keep choosing. Like one of the big things was um, I work at Titan Shops, which is the bookstore at Cal State Fullerton. And I was parking by this park and walking to the school, so I didn't have to pay for parking at school. And this park is one of my favorite parks in Fullerton. It's called Acacia Park. And it's funny because actually my ex-boyfriend showed me that park, but I really like this park. And I would just make it a point that when I got out of work, instead of going home right away, I would just sit at the park in the grass for like however long I felt like it. Like sometimes it'd be like 45 minutes, other times it'd be like 2 hours. And I would just like take off my shoes, just get my feet in the grass and just lay down and just, I'd let myself think. Sometimes I'd meditate, sometimes I'd do stretches or whatever, but just being outside by myself, like that used to be something that really scared me. Like, oh, I don't want to just be by myself somewhere. Like that sounds terrible. But then I started choosing to do that for myself every day. And I noticed how much more at peace and grounded and happy I just felt. And so just kept making that choice.
It feels like magic to me. The path. I mean, it feels whatever, not intangible, because it is. But to have this like pathway, again, this pathway that was leading you in this negative mindset, and then a one big traumatic thing happened, and a couple medium level things happened, and now this whole new persona, or this whole, you're not a different person, but
Oh, but I am.
you
I
are.
am.
Okay,
That's
so
the thing.
so so again, you've tried to explain it to me, but I think I don't know that you can explain it on some level. Like how are you a different person now? Like how does that happen how do you go from 22 to 22 and a half and you're a completely different person?
Well, okay. Well, I turned 22 in October, so I was
Yeah,
21.
21 to 25. Yes.
But it does feel crazy. Like it does feel like magic. Sometimes talking about it, I'm like, I don't know how I did it either. But it's because every day was just like I used to wake up and think about every day as like just a challenge, like a chore. But then I started choosing to look at every day as like this is a new opportunity to try and get better, to try and do something different, to make you feel like, to align you up in the path that's going to make you feel good. Like, so it's like a practice. It's just like meditation is a practice, just like yoga is a practice. You have to practice happiness and health, mental health, and choosing the right choices for yourself. And so it was definitely like every day after, like, because the first 6 months of this year, honestly, can't distinguish some days from other days. Sometimes it was just like a big blob. But literally the second half of this year, from July to now, I felt like every day was distinct in that I was making it more about myself than I ever had before. And I was choosing actively to help myself in multiple areas of my life that I had been neglecting for so long, because I just knew I didn't want to keep neglecting it anymore and keep going down that path of darkness, because I hated it, and I hated how I felt about myself when I was on that path. And so I just knew that I couldn't keep doing things the same way. So I had to radically change my own thought patterns and change my lifestyle to be able to better support myself. And that slowly developed over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Obviously with help, lots of help from people.
It's still inexplicable, but but it's awesome. So I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy that you found the whatever. I always talk about silver bullets or magic bullets. Like, hey, what's this? Or the easy button? Hey, tell me what the easy button is on this project or this process or this thing, whatever it is. And the answer is there is no easy button. So it's a process. Everything's a process. Everything takes continuous effort to make anything good happen. And so you you found a well of effort or want or something in there, and that is helping fuel you.
Yeah. I mean, I know you said it's like, it seems like difficult, but I mean, it is difficult, but at the same time, it's like, we so easily put an effort to bringing ourselves down, right? Like I was so easily feeding into my own negative thoughts, and I just stopped, or I tried to stop doing that as much and start feeding into the positive thoughts more. It's like I feel like they're two sides of the same coin. You just have to like start flipping it more, you know? And
Glass half full, glass half empty
yeah.
mindset.
Yeah, but also like the things, like there's so much we can learn about ourselves from other people. Like we shouldn't get too dependent on other people, but like one thing I've started doing for myself which really helped is my ex-boyfriend would always tell me like, "Oh, you're beautiful, you're gorgeous." Like, he'd say good morning, good night to me. So I started doing that for myself. Like I would wake up in the mirror in the mornings and be like, "Good morning, Natalie. You're beautiful. We're going to have a great day." Like just self-talk. Like I'd never talked to myself as much as I have in the last 6 months of my life, like that I ever have before. And it's because when you are forced to be with yourself, you it doesn't have to be like a burden. We're creators by nature. That's who human beings are. We have creative life forces. And so I've just been trying to actively make my creation something of positivity for myself and something that empowers me, not something that brings me down.
So do you feel like you have a I mean, we've got to change mindset. So, but do you think there's a chance of going back to the old Natalie again?
Yeah. Yeah, because I get glimmers of her every now and then and it freaks me out a little bit, not gonna lie. But the thing is that I know I am a changed person, but that doesn't mean that the stuff that happened in the past isn't any less a part of who I am.
Sure.
And that's been a really difficult aspect of the healing process, I think, is kind of learning to accept all of who you are and love yourself unconditionally, the good parts and the ugly bad parts too. Because looking back at those really dark choices I made, I have to just love myself and accept that that was me doing the best I could for where I was at. And now, if I feel like I can start to feel myself get sucked back into more of those lower energies, I just can't judge myself for it because that's how I lived for so long, was like that. Like that was my normal for so long. And it's just because now I've shifted so much that it feels kind of scary to get back into to that extreme anxiety or depression. But it still happens, like happens all the time to me still. I just feel like the way that I'm treating it in my own mind, I'm trying to judge it less and just offer it more love and be like, well, why do you feel like you have to react in this way? Like what is going on? Like what do you need that you're missing right now? I try to use my emotions as little messengers, not to think like, oh, I am all my negative thoughts. I am this darkness. I'm just the one having these experiences. I'm the conscious observer of my own life.
Good. Do you feel like you have safety mechanisms in place in your life to, or roadblocks or rumble strips that if things start going badly, that you have ways to keep things on the tracks? I don't know how to say it, but something like that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm working on developing that more, but definitely, I've been really blessed with my therapist that I've been going to since May, the free one. She is such a homie. She always pulls through. Like, if I don't have an appointment scheduled with her, but something comes up that's really like messing me up, she's usually really good about getting back to me, and we'll have like a quick meeting or something. And she sent me a lot of resources for things to do when I'm starting to spiral, how to kind of get myself out of there. Um, the biggest thing, honestly, like the easiest little trick is to just stay present. Like, I know it sounds really simple, but in the present moment, most of the time, everything's okay. Even if there's uncertainty, if you really take a deep breath and just ground yourself, you say, like, okay, what day is it? What time is it? Where am I? Things are okay. The present is usually pretty peaceful. And so I've noticed that, like, when I start to spiral and stuff, it's because I'm either afraid of what's going to happen, what might happen, or I'm ruminating about stuff in the past that already did happen and I can't do anything to change it. But in the present moment, I can just make the choice, the active conscious choice to help myself heal and just go through the process of it. And that's the best thing we can do, I think, is just be present with where we're at.
I think you just answered my last question already.
What was the last question?
What is it? You're a mind reader, not a mind reader. You can see the future. I forget what the name of that person is. But I was going to ask you, if you could give an unhappy person advice on how to be happy, what would you tell them?
Honestly, it's just this is, I have so much to say. We are so capable. We are, like I said about before, we're all like creators. We are so capable as human beings. We have so many gifts and abilities that we take for granted for ourselves all the time. And one of our greatest gifts is just like, we are all deeply unique individuals. And that used to make me feel like, I used to feel really different from everybody else. And I would judge myself. I'm like, oh, why am I not like, nobody's really like anybody else. We're all different. And so we all have different things that we're passionate about and bring us joy and happiness. And I think the biggest thing to just working towards happiness is like, the things that bring you happiness and joy, go for them. Don't hold back, like, if you have this great image of like an ideal perfect life, like your dream life, start in this present moment right now doing things to get you there, because you can get there. Like, the only thing that really limits us is our own mind. And so, like, one thing, I really love plants and animals. I love nature. I love the outside. And I remember back in May when I was first trying to find a place to live, I was like, I need to find somewhere with cool roommates and they have to be okay with my plants. And like, I was thinking about all these things. And now I'm living in an apartment with 3 animals. I have a dog and 2 cats, and I have my plants and I have cool roommates. And it's like, I didn't know this was all going to happen, at the time when I was really worried about it. But I just kept being present with myself and choosing, moment by moment to align myself with the things that make me happy. And so it's like, now I literally have little furry babies to just hug if I want to. And that makes me so happy, And so I feel like we are all so much more capable of creating the happy, peaceful life for ourselves. We just have to identify, what makes us happy and just go after it more, and just, we'll get there eventually. Just gotta put in a little conscious effort into getting there yourself, because nobody's gonna do it for you either. You got to do it for yourself. And it feels so much better when you do it for yourself too, because you're like, I'm helping me out. Like, who gets to reap the benefits of this? Me. It's like, it's a good feeling to be your own supporter.
All right. I think that's a good place to leave it. So thanks so much, Natalie. This is really good. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I wish peace and love for everybody. And seriously, like, you'll get through it. Even though it's dark and terrible, like, you'll get through it. Seriously, like, as cliche as it sounds, you will.
Thank you for listening today to Listen Up, the Stand Up for Kids podcast. A big thank you to Gabby Villarreal and Billy Quinn for their production and editing support. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click here to watch more. Please also consider a donation to help getting kids off the streets using the link below. 92 cents out of every dollar donated goes directly to supporting these kids. I'm your host, Michael Olson, Director of Development at Stand Up for Kids Orange County. Thanks for listening and have a great day.